I'm a black boy. I saved a millionaire's pregnant wife on a flight. What I asked left him crying welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. ATDN, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. I had been traveling for work and I was sitting by the window of my small economy seat, staring out at the clouds, lost in thought. It was supposed to be just another flight routine, uneventful, but something about that morning felt different. I can't explain it, but I had this strange feeling deep inside, like the air around me was holding its breath. I was just settling in when I noticed him, a young man sitting a few rows ahead, quietly watching the passengers. He didn't look like a typical traveler. His clothes were simple, not flashy, and there was something about his calmness that made him stand out. I didn't think much of it at first, but then the air shifted. A few minutes into the flight, I heard a sudden gasp. It was sharp, almost desperate. I turned my head, and that's when I saw her, the woman in the seat across the aisle. She was clutching her stomach, her face pale and wet with sweat. Her husband was beside her, speaking rapidly, his voice tense and urgent, but no one seemed to act fast enough. I watched for a moment, unsure what to do. When Malik, that was his name, I learned later, stood up. There was something in the way he moved, like he knew exactly what needed to be done. He didn't ask permission. He didn't hesitate. He just went. He knelt beside her, his hands steady as he spoke softly to her. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but there was a warmth in his voice, a quiet determination. But then, I noticed the way some of the other passengers looked at him. Not with gratitude, but with suspicion. There was something heavier in the way they stared, like they were questioning why he was the one helping. And that's when it started to get tense. One of the flight attendants approached him, her voice low but firm. "Sir, please step back." But Malik didn't. He stayed there, focused entirely on her, ignoring the murmurs and the glances. The atmosphere changed completely. The air felt thick, almost electric, like everyone in the cabin was holding their breath. It wasn't just about a medical emergency anymore. It was about something else. Something that I could sense but couldn't put into words yet. There was a resistance, not from fear, but from something darker. I didn't know it at the time, but this moment was about to spiral into something I could never have imagined. The woman gasped again, louder this time. Malik leaned closer, whispering something to her. She nodded faintly, her eyes closing. And then the husband spoke up again, his voice cracking, desperate. But instead of helping, there was hesitation from the crew. It felt wrong, and I could see it on Malik's face too, a flicker of frustration. Then, without warning, the plane jolted. Not a huge turbulence, but enough to make everyone gasp. Malik didn't move. His hands stayed on her. The noise of the engine seemed to fade. Every breath, every heartbeat felt louder. The silence between passengers was deafening. I could feel it then. I could feel the tension inside me. This wasn't just an emergency. It was turning into a moment where courage and prejudice were colliding. And Malik was in the middle of it. He glanced around. For a moment, he looked directly at me, and I swear I saw something in his eyes, a mixture of fear, resolve, and something unspoken. Then he nodded to himself and continued helping her. He didn't care about the doubt or the looks. He only cared about the doubt or the looks. He only cared about her survival. That's when I realized something. This was more than a rescue. This was about standing up. Even when the world seemed to be against you, and whatever happened next, it would change everything. The cabin felt heavier after that moment. It wasn't just the tension from the emergency. It was something unspoken, something that lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. People were watching, not just Malik, but the entire scene. Every whisper, every glance seemed sharper now, as if we were all holding our breaths, waiting for what would happen next. I remember leaning forward in my seat, heart pounding. My own hands were trembling. I couldn't look away. It was like watching something you knew was important, but couldn't fully understand yet. Malik was kneeling there, completely focused on her. The pregnant woman's breathing was shallow and uneven. Her husband still kneeling beside her, his face pale and drawn. I could hear him muttering words I couldn't catch, something that sounded like both prayer and panic. The flight attendants moved around them, whispering to each other, casting wary glances toward Malik. One of them leaned closer to the lead attendant. I heard the word protocol. Another shook her head, almost as if she wanted to intervene but wasn't sure she had permission. It was chaos hidden in stillness. Malik's face was fixed in determination. He didn't flinch when one attendant stepped closer and asked again for him to step back. Instead, he leaned in harder, speaking softly to her, his voice carrying a strange, steady rhythm. I wanted to hear what he was saying, it seemed important, but the hum of the plane filled the air between us. I noticed something then. A shift in the passengers. The murmuring got louder, but it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was judgment. I saw it in the way some people looked at Malik. Their eyes weren't looking at him as a man saving a life. They were questioning him, wondering why he was there, who he was, and maybe in some quiet way, whether he should even be there at all. It felt wrong. I felt anger stir inside me, not at Malik, but at the way this had become bigger than the emergency. This had become about something else, something I couldn't yet name. But I knew it wasn't just about the woman in distress anymore. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, but with urgency. "We're preparing for an emergency landing." The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. Everyone moved. There was sudden noise, cries, shuffling, the sharp breath of fear. But Malik stayed where he was. His hands never left her. I could see the husband's hands trembling now, gripping Malik's shoulder. Malik looked at him for just a moment, and then returned to her side. That's when I noticed it. The way some passengers were filming with their phones. Not out of admiration, but suspicion. And in that moment, I knew this was no longer just a medical emergency. This was a story that would not end quietly. And I knew something was about to change forever. The plane felt different now. The air was thick, like it was holding a storm inside it. You could hear it in the nervous rustle of seatbelts, in the quiet coughing of passengers, in the low hum of anxious whispers. Nobody moved much, but everyone was watching. Malik, the woman, the husband, and somehow even me, though I was far enough away to still feel like an outsider to this chaos. The sound of the intercom faded into my mind. The captain's words still echoing. "We're preparing for an emergency landing." I could feel my own breath quicken. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this moment was bigger than just what was happening here in this plane. It was one of those moments where you sense that nothing will ever be the same again. I watched Malik lean closer to her again. She was pale now, her breathing uneven, her hand clutching her belly like it was the last anchor keeping her here. The husband's face was buried in his hands, shoulders trembling. There was a desperate fear in him I've never seen before, like someone holding on to hope while staring straight at the end. And then, something happened. The woman's body jolted, and she let out a sharp cry. Panic rose instantly in the cabin. Some passengers gasped, others moved forward instinctively, and a few froze. The husband shouted something I couldn't understand, words spilling out in a rush of fear and pain. Malik didn't hesitate. He shifted his weight, blocking out the voices. The fear, the judgment in the air. I could see the tension in his shoulders. His entire body was locked into that moment. It was as though the world had narrowed down to just him and her. Everything else disappeared. But then one of the attendants stepped forward again, her voice firmer this time. "Sir, you need to step away, please." Malik looked up, not at her, but at the husband, as if asking silently for permission. The husband's face twisted in pain, then turned to Malik with desperate pleading in his eyes. Malik nodded, but he didn't move away. Instead, his hands pressed harder, as though he knew he had no time to waste. And I realized then, this wasn't just about saving her life. This was about a fight he didn't even choose, but that had chosen him. It was about proving something that words could never explain. the plane shuddered again. We were moments away from landing and everyone knew it. The murmuring turned to quiet murmurs of fear. Phones were still recording, cameras flashing, eyes fixed on Malik. And in that moment, I felt something inside me shift, because I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Not for him, not for her, not for any of us who saw it. Something was about to break open. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, like the entire plane was holding its breath. Every sound felt sharper now. The hiss of the ventilation, the low hum of the engines, the quiet gasps of passengers. But above all, there was the sound of her breathing, short, uneven, desperate. I could feel it from where I sat. And somehow, that sound was pulling everyone's attention. Malik didn't flinch. He leaned closer to her again, his hands steady now, though his face was tight with strain. The husband was no longer kneeling beside her. He was collapsed in his seat, hands clutching his head, his body trembling. You could feel his helplessness like a wave sweeping across the cabin. I noticed that some passengers were holding their breath. Phones were still pointed toward them. But now it wasn't curiosity, it was raw tension. People were whispering in hushed tones. Some looked at Malik with doubt, others with awe. But no one moved forward. And then, everything shifted. A sudden cry from the woman, a sharp intake of breath. Her body convulsed. Malik reacted instantly, pulling her close, murmuring something urgent. The attendants stepped back, their own fear visible now. The captain's voice came again, quiet, urgent. Brace for landing. The words hit the cabin like thunder. Passengers gripped armrests, some closing their eyes. But Malik stayed locked on her. He didn't move an inch, even as the plane began to tilt and shake. You could feel the metal groan under pressure. I leaned forward, unable to tear my eyes away. Her face was pale, beads of sweat running down her forehead. She was breathing shallowly now, struggling. Malik's voice, soft but firm, cut through the noise. And then, without warning, she clutched his arm. And in that moment, something changed. I could see the husband rising, staggering forward despite his weakness. His face was raw with emotion, fear, gratitude, desperation. Malik turned to him, and for a second, their eyes locked. No words were spoken, but I swear I saw something pass between them. Then Malik turned back to her, his hands still steady. He looked at me for the briefest moment. I don't know why, but I felt the weight of that look in my chest. Because I knew this was no longer just a fight for her life. It was a fight for something much bigger, something that would not be forgotten. The plane shuddered again, louder this time, and the moment hung there in the air, thick and unshakable. We were all holding our breath, and I knew this was the turning point. The plane's wheels hit the runway with a loud, trembling roar. The entire cabin shook. A burst of tension broke, shrieks, gasps, and the sound of seatbelts releasing. People clutched each other. Phones dropped, faces turned, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. But Malik didn't move, not until the plane slowed to a full stop. Even then, his hands stayed steady on her. She was breathing now, but shallowly, weakly, as if every breath cost her something precious. The husband knelt beside her again, holding her hand, whispering words I couldn't hear. His face was wet, not just from tears, but from a relief so deep it seemed almost painful. I remember seeing Malik rise slowly, his hands trembling now too. He stood there quietly, looking around the cabin. Some people stared, some avoided his gaze, and some, like me, felt a mix of awe and confusion. They opened the doors. Paramedics rushed in, the sounds of their equipment mixing with urgent voices. The couple was lifted away carefully. Malik stepped back, his chest rising and falling fast. He didn't look at anyone as he walked toward the exit. I could feel the weight of silence behind him. The passengers weren't talking. No one moved quickly. It was as though we were all holding on to that moment, unsure what had just happened. Later, I found myself replaying it over and over in my mind. Malik, the stranger who risked everything. The pregnant woman who fought for her life. The husband whose gratitude was silent but unshakable. And the judgment, the suspicion in the eyes of people who should have only seen a life being saved. It wasn't just about a plane landing safely. It was about humanity, about how in moments that matter most, some people choose to act without thinking of who they are, where they came from, or what they might lose. I still remember the words I never heard, but felt in the way Malik stayed beside her, the way he refused to move. And I still ask myself, every time I think of it, if it had been me, would I have done the same? Because maybe that's the real question. Not what happened on that flight. Not who was right or wrong, but whether we would have the courage to stand when the world is holding its breath. And I wonder how many more lives are waiting for someone to stand.